Welcome to Truth Behind History. The stories are real, the impact is lasting. What if the stability of entire civilizations rested on something you could hold in the palm of your hand? Something so scarce, so unchanging, that people across centuries trusted it more than kings, empires, or paper promises. That something was gold. Let's begin at the beginning. Long before spreadsheets and central banks, ancient societies like Egypt and Rome turned to gold as a form of money. And they did so for good reason. Gold doesn't rust, it doesn't corrode, and perhaps most importantly, it doesn't magically multiply. Its scarcity gave it value, its durability gave it longevity, and its divisibility, well, that made it practical. You could weigh it, measure it, and trust it. Now fast forward to the late 1800s. The classical gold standard emerged, particularly from the 1870s to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. Nations began pegging their currencies to a fixed amount of gold. This wasn't just a formality, it created a world where money had a universal anchor. You could travel from London to Paris to New York and expect stable exchange rates. Trade flourished, capital flowed. There was a certain predictability, a confidence that today's monetary systems often struggle to replicate. But gold wasn't just shiny metal, it represented principles. Sound money, at its core, rests on three pillars: scarcity, neutrality, and trust. Gold didn't favor any one government. It couldn't be printed on demand. And that discipline? It fostered credibility. Because when money is hard to make, it's also hard to fake. So here's a question to sit with. What happens when societies move away from that foundation? When trust is no longer backed by something tangible, but instead by a policy? We'll explore that as the story unfolds. As the dust settled after World War II, the global economy needed a new foundation. Countries were rebuilding, trade needed to restart, but trust, especially in currencies, was shattered. Enter the Bretton Woods Agreement. In 1944, delegates from 44 nations met in a quiet New Hampshire hotel to reshape the world's monetary order. The solution? Peg the US dollar to gold at $35 an ounce, and peg every other currency to the US dollar. Simple in theory, monumental in impact. The United States emerged from the war with the largest gold reserves in the world. So it made sense, on paper, for the dollar to become the anchor of global finance. And here's the key detail: foreign central banks could take their dollars and trade them in for actual gold. This convertibility promise wasn't just symbolic, it created trust. The dollar was as good as gold, literally. But as you might suspect, this new arrangement created new incentives. With the dollar at the center, the United States now had a powerful lever. It could expand its fiscal reach without the same immediate constraints faced by other countries. Spending increased, influence expanded, but behind that dominance, obligations were quietly piling up. Here's where it gets interesting. The very system designed to promote stability planted the seeds of its own fragility. What happens when promises outpace reality? When a system depends on restraint, but rewards excess? That tension would soon boil over. By the 1960s, cracks had begun to show in the glittering surface of the Bretton Woods system. On paper, everything still looked stable, but under the surface, pressure was mounting. The United States was spending a lot. At home, ambitious domestic programs like the Great Society were expanding government services. Abroad, the Vietnam War demanded billions. But here's the problem: while dollars were being printed to cover these costs, gold reserves were not growing to match them. It's like issuing more tickets to a concert than there are seats in the arena, and hoping nobody notices. But countries did notice. Foreign governments, especially France under Charles de Gaulle, began calling America's bluff. They started redeeming their dollars for gold, just as the US had promised. Shipments of gold quietly flowed out of Fort Knox, and every bar that left weakened the illusion that the system was sustainable. Then came the London gold pool collapse. The gold pool was a coordinated effort by major Western nations to suppress the market price of gold and keep it fixed at $35 an ounce. But when people stop believing in a fixed price, its market forces take over. Speculators bet against the system. Central banks couldn't hold the line. And in 1968, the gold pool failed. What we saw in the 1960s was more than a monetary scuffle, it was a crisis of confidence. Trust was evaporating. The world sensed that the foundation was cracking. And yet, the illusion continued, for a little while longer, but not for long. August 15, 1971, a date that quietly, but profoundly, reshaped the global economy. With mounting pressure and gold reserves dwindling, President Richard Nixon took to the airwaves and made a stunning announcement: the United States would no longer honor the dollar's convertibility into gold. Just like that, the gold window was slammed shut. It was a unilateral move. No votes from Congress, no consultation with allies. A system built on trust, on redeemability, was now just a memory. Dollars could no longer be exchanged for gold. They were backed by nothing but faith. To manage the shock, Nixon rolled out a set of emergency economic controls. Price freezes, wage freezes, import surcharges. In other words, aggressive government intervention to prevent chaos while the monetary gears realigned. But here's the real turning point. The dollar officially became a fiat currency. That word, fiat, simply means by decree. It has value because the government says it does, not because it's tied to anything physical, not because it's scarce, just because. This moment marked the death of the gold-backed global system. From now on, central banks and governments had far more freedom to print, to spend, to intervene. But with that freedom came volatility, inflation, and new forms of economic risk. The world had stepped into unknown territory. The safety net was gone. So, what happened after we left the gold standard behind? Well, welcome to the Fiat Era. Without the gold anchor, currencies became untethered. Governments and central banks now had the power to expand the money supply without needing a vault full of metal to back it up. And almost immediately, the world saw the consequences. The 1970s brought us a new word, stagflation. That's stagnant economic growth plus rising inflation. It wasn't supposed to happen under traditional models, but it did. Prices climbed, wages lagged, and economic uncertainty became the new norm. And look at this, since the 1970s, productivity has continued to rise, but wages? Not so much. That historic link between what workers produce and what they're paid began to unravel. Why? Because inflation doesn't impact everyone equally. When new money enters the system, it benefits those closest to the faucet, banks, corporations, and governments, long before it trickles down to everyday workers. Meanwhile, central banks became the new monetary monarchs. Institutions like the Federal Reserve stepped into the spotlight, using tools like interest rates and bond purchases to steer the economy. But here's the twist. With great power comes recurring crises. Every few years, a new bubble, a new bailout, a new emergency that justifies more intervention. And so the cycle continues. No gold, no discipline, just levers and the hands that pull them. Let's pull back the curtain and look at how this new fiat system distorts the very incentives that shape our economy. When money can be created out of thin air, the first recipients of that money, usually banks, large corporations, and government contractors, get to spend it before prices rise. This is known as the Cantillan Effect. Named after the 18th century economist Richard Cantillan, it reveals a hidden truth. Inflation doesn't hit everyone equally. It's not a rising tide, it's a rising tide with lifeboats for the connected, and water in the lungs for the rest. Think about it. If you're the government or a favored bank, you get cheap money early. You can buy assets, invest, expand. But by the time that money circulates through the economy, prices have already gone up. So the average worker, their wage buys less, their savings shrink, their rent climbs, but their paycheck stays the same. And then come the bubbles. Artificially low interest rates, fueled by easy money, drive speculative manias, housing, tech stocks, crypto frenzies, you name it. When those bubbles pop, the very institutions that helped inflate them often get bailed out, while ordinary people lose jobs, homes, and stability. And let's not forget the biggest distortion of all, government debt. With no gold restraint, governments can spend far more than they collect. They borrow, then they borrow again. And central banks make it easier by buying that debt, essentially financing the state with printed money. This masks the true cost of programs, wars, and waste. Voters feel less of the pain, so there's less accountability. But over time, the weight of this imbalance grows heavier, because while fiat money allows for short-term solutions, it also plants the seeds for long-term decay. So if the fiat system is so prone to distortion, what's the alternative? Well, history offers us some fascinating answers. For centuries, communities and civilizations have experimented with decentralized forms of money, systems not controlled by a single government or central bank. Gold and silver coins were the earliest and most enduring examples. They were mined, weighed, and exchanged directly. No politician could simply declare more into existence. But the idea didn't stop in the past. Today, modern technology has revived interest in decentralized currencies, none more famous than Bitcoin. Created in 2009, Bitcoin is a digital asset with a fixed supply, 21 million coins, ever. No central authority, no printing press, just math, code, and consensus. But it's not just about Bitcoin. Around the world, local and alternative currencies have emerged. In Switzerland, the WIR system has helped businesses trade during downturns. Some towns issue community currencies to support local trade. In times of crisis, think Argentina, Zimbabwe, or Weimar Germany, people have resorted to bartering, foreign currency, or commodities to protect their wealth. And here's what these examples reveal. When trust in centralized money breaks down, people don't wait for permission. They adapt, they innovate, they seek value they can understand, and control. Decentralized money, in all its forms, represents more than just an economic tool. It's a statement, a quiet rebellion, a reminder that people, not institutions, are the ultimate source of value. So the question is, are we headed for a renaissance of monetary freedom, or have we forgotten the lessons history tried to teach? So, what does all of this tell us? It tells us that money is never just money. It's a mirror. It reflects the values, the systems, and the power structures of the societies that create it. When money is tied to something real, like gold, it forces discipline. It limits reckless spending. It protects savers. And it aligns incentives in a way that rewards work, thrift, and trust. But when money is untethered, when it's created by decree, it becomes a tool of control. A mechanism not just for exchange, but for influence. Governments grow. Debt expands. The gap between policy and consequence widens. And often, the people paying the price are the last to realize it. History shows us that monetary systems are not neutral. They shape empires. They enable wars. They spark revolutions. And sometimes, quietly, they erode the very foundations of freedom. That's why it matters, not just for economists or investors, but for everyone. Because whether you're saving for the future, building a business, or simply trying to make sense of rising prices, the story of money is your story too. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Truth Behind History. We post thoughtful, engaging content that digs deeper into the stories others overlook. You can find links to our TikTok, Instagram, and podcast in the description. And if you want to dive even further, check out my book, History They Tried to Erase. It uncovers forgotten truths and uncomfortable realities that shape the world we live in today. Thanks for watching, and remember, understanding the past is the key to making sense of the present.